Martinique is a verdant Caribbean island, known for exporting bananas and welcoming tourists seeking a tropical paradise. But for locals, it's a different, more complex story. More than a quarter of residents in the French territory are poor, twice the rate of in mainland France. And a trip to the supermarket offers a snapshot of their struggles. Let's start with something as basic as water. Christelle Marie-Sant is buying it in bottles because the water in the tap at home is yellow tinted. But she balks at the price she has to pay.
Des packs d'eau parce que mon mari il est à l'hôpital, donc je lui ramenais de l'eau. Et on prend que le strict nécessaire en fait dans les grandes surfaces parce que c'est trop cher.
Some residents accept these higher prices, crediting French government subsidies, saying they help to raise living standards. But official data shows that prices for food products there are on average 40% higher than here in mainland France. Now, it makes sense that if you live on a small, faraway island, you might pay more for products brought from across the ocean. But that alone doesn't explain the gap. And in Martinique, there is something deeply intertwined with questions of race and class and the territory's colonial past. Like many Caribbean islands, enslaved people were brought here to work on plantations from the 17th to the 19th century, and the descendants of the white enslaver families, locally known as Beke, who make up just 1% of the population, still control swathes of the economy. The largest commercial groups in the supermarket sector are accused of anti-competitive practices that contribute to the high prices. The mistrust of Maine's water in Martinique is compounded by the island's history with a toxic pesticide used on banana plantations until 1993, called chlordecone. And the businessman who imported the pesticide was also from a Beke family. The French government has concluded that chlordecone seeped into the soil and food there, contaminating nearly the entire population, and has said that it is linked to the risk of developing prostate cancer. An official from the French Geological Survey in Martinique acknowledged this mistrust. He said that tap water is drinkable, but there are problems with water outages due to leaky infrastructure, and that the discoloured water is due to old piping and a lack of maintenance. The water story doesn't end there, though. Though Le Fort is one of the cheaper water brands on the island, it costs double an equivalent product in supermarkets around Paris. And it is locally bottled by a firm owned by another descendant of a 19th century enslaver. And the largest group in the supermarket sector, a conglomerate called GBH, is also owned by a family with ancestors that own enslaved people. The group published its annual accounts for the first time this year after a lawsuit by activists.
C'est plus l'État que voilà, c'est la faute à l'État, hein, c'est je sais pas. Je vois pas qui d'autre. L'État, il y a les béquets aussi, hein, mais bon, voilà, si les béquets ils ont pris cette aise-là, c'est qui leur a donné, c'est bien l'État, non?
A director of GBH told Reuters the firm was in an extremely intense competitive environment, and that the company published its accounts because times had changed and there was pressure for transparency. He said that reparations for slavery should be symbolic. The French Overseas Ministry referred us to its minister's recent visit to Martinique, where he called on businesses to be more transparent about their profits, and he committed to bring in a law to fight anti-competitive practices. The Élysée did not answer our request for comment, but a local official did. Serge Letchmy leads Martinique's regional government. He told Reuters he's planning to introduce a bill that would support local farmers, give the island more decision-making power, and seek to centralize water management to lower prices and encourage investment.
Donc si on gagne ce pari-là, on pourra revoir le modèle post-colonial qui demeure et inscrire le développement dans la capacité que nous avons à innover. Et il faut aussi que la France accepte d'arrêter de tuteliser à partir de Paris et laisser les pays d'outre-mer se développer en toute harmonie avec la diplomatie territoriale extérieure.
Activists say more is needed. Last year there were protests and unrest over high prices. The protest movement is winning some concessions from Paris, with a recent promise of legislation to tackle the high cost of living and anti-competitive practices by large businesses. Now activists say that they're planning fresh demonstrations. Mario Briand is part of a group called Gathering for the Protection of Afro-Caribbean People and Resources.
Si on vous adressait ces prix-là en France hexagonale, vous serez outrés, vous serez écœurés. Et tout de suite, je pense que vous serez bien nombreux à descendre dans les rues et à se dire qu'est-ce qui se passe, c'est quoi ce bordel. Sauf qu'on en a eu 1000 km et on se retrouve à souffrir en silence.
America's warriors stand shoulder to shoulder every day with their Japan Self-Defense Force counterparts. Our forces operate and train together across all domains to uphold deterrence. America and Japan stand firmly together in the face of aggressive and coercive actions by the Communist Chinese. I want to announce that the Defense Department has started phase 1 of upgrading U.S. Forces Japan to a joint force headquarters. This upgrade will improve our ability to coordinate operations with Japan's own Joint Operations Command, or JJOC. Soon we will add additional personnel in Tokyo and at U.S. Forces Japan headquarters to conduct activities that will strengthen our bilateral bonds and deepen our operational cooperation. This also means reorganizing U.S. Forces Japan into a warfighting headquarters, increasing its staff and giving its commander the authorities needed to accomplish new missions. As I mentioned in our meeting, America and Japan, we seek peace. But as my first platoon motto says, those who long for peace must prepare for war. We must be prepared.
မိနေတဲ့24နှစ်အရွယ်အမျိုးသားတဦးအားမြန်မာရှာဖွေကယ်ဆယ်ရေးတပ်ဖွဲ့ဝင်များနဲ့စင်ကာပူအမျိုးသားရှာဖွေကယ်ဆယ်ရေးတပ်ဖွဲ့ဝင်များပူးပေါင်းပြီး24နာရီကြာဆောင်ရွက်ခဲ့ရာဒီကနေ့မနက်ပိုင်းမှာအသက်ရှင်လျက်ကယ်တင်ရရှိခဲ့ကြောင်းသိရပါတယ်။ကယ်ဆယ်မှုနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးရှာဖွေကယ်ဆယ်ရေးတပ်ဖွဲ့ဝင်များကအခုလိုပြောကြားထား
We were able to rescue the man who is around 24 years of age from the rubble. It took us 24 hours for this operation to save this man. He had been stuck under the rubble for about 40 hours.
За минулу ніч було загалом 172 ударні дрони.
Over the past night, there were a total of 172 attack drones, more than 100 of them being Shaheds. Such massive drone strikes are now happening almost daily, along with missile and ballistic threats. Our partners must understand that these Russian strikes target not only our people, but also all international efforts, diplomatic efforts aimed at ending this war. Russia is striking against the positions of everyone who seeks to end the war. It is impossible to ignore hundreds of Shaheds every night. We expect a response, a serious response. We are working to ensure reaction. Strong reaction is needed, especially from America, Europe, and all those in the world who rely on diplomacy. Russia must be forced into peace. Only pressure will work.
Примусити до миру і тільки примус спрацює.
وقد تسلمنا قبل يومين.
Hamas chief Khalil al-Hayya said in a speech televised Saturday that the militant group has agreed to a Gaza ceasefire proposal it received this week from mediators in Egypt and Qatar. He added that he hopes the Israeli occupation will not undermine the plan aimed at securing a pause in the Hamas-Israel war in Gaza that erupted in October 2023. Security sources told Reuters on Thursday that Egypt had received positive indications from Israel over a new ceasefire proposal that would include a transitional phase. The proposal suggests Hamas release 5 of the Israeli hostages it is holding each week, the sources said. It comes as Hamas released video Saturday of Israeli hostage Elkanah Bobat asking for help to be freed so he can see his wife and son. And as protesters against the Israeli government like Amun Shan Gillan took to the streets of Tel Aviv to push for their return.
We're here today because we want all the hostages to come home and all the people of Gaza to come home also. All the people need to have life. We all like to live. This is what we want.
while Palestinians in Gaza's Han Yunis like Hadaya al-Najjar prepared for Eid on Saturday, amidst Israel's resumption of an aerial and ground operation.
We want a solution. We don't want the situation to stay like this. We are people like everyone else. Aren't we human beings? Don't the children have the right to be joyful, like all the other children off the road? Why should we be different?
The Israeli Prime Minister's office said it had discussed the proposal and has sent a counter-proposal to the mediators. Reuters asked the Prime Minister's office if it had also agreed to the ceasefire proposal, but it did not immediately respond.
A Congolese general expressed indignation on Friday at social media posts by the president of Uganda's son that threatened to seize a city in northern Congo.
UPDF continues to be.
Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who is head of the Uganda People's Defense Forces, or UPDF, made the threats last weekend as he commented on an offensive by Rwanda-backed M23 rebels in eastern Congo. He wrote that UPDF will not oppose M23's seizure of Kisangani, but they better move quickly, otherwise we will do it ourselves. Kainerugaba, who regularly makes inflammatory social media posts, also threatened to arrest the governor of Ituri province, who he said was resisting UPDF's operations. General Jacques Chaligonza, who is in charge of operations and intelligence for Congo's military, was asked about the comments on Friday. He said Kainerugaba had no right to threaten the governor, and they had told him if he continues with this, we will also have a fierce response. Uganda has had thousands of troops in eastern Congo, north of the fighting with M23, since 2021, to help fight another militia, the Allied Democratic Forces. UPDF's Ground Forces Commander, Lieutenant General Kayanja Muhanga, said on Friday that after defeating the ADF, Uganda's military will have nothing left to do in Congo.
That's the message. After achieving peace in Ituri, then the Uganda People's Defense Forces will have to go back to Sudan.
The incident reflects heightened diplomatic tensions amid the biggest conflict in decades in Congo's east. M23 rebels have captured the region's two largest cities, Goma and Bukavu, since January. The violence has prompted fears of a wider regional war, with the armies of Congo, Rwanda and Burundi having all participated in the fighting.
More than 100 people are dead after a powerful earthquake rocked Myanmar on Friday, according to authorities who say that number is likely to rise. Much of the devastation from the 7.7 magnitude quake occurred in Mandalay, Myanmar's second largest city. The deadly quake was followed by a powerful aftershock and several more moderate ones. The tremor shook neighboring Thailand, tearing down a skyscraper under construction in the capital, Bangkok. Witnesses say people ran to the streets in panic. Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra sought to reassure residents that Bangkok's high-rise buildings are built to withstand quakes.
Buildings in Bangkok are constructed beyond the standard. Even if the earthquake had been stronger, they would still be able to withstand it. Right now, inspections show that all buildings are safe to return to. The only affected structures are those under construction, which have issues with stability and walls.
A U.S. government analysis based on the strength and depth of the quake estimated there could be thousands of deaths and severe economic loss.
And we send our condolences.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said Myanmar has asked for international support and that the UN is mobilizing its resources in the region.
We will be helping. We've already spoken with the country.
And U.S. President Donald Trump has said his administration would be providing some form of assistance.
You have not done a good job by the people of Greenland.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance slammed Denmark during a visit to Greenland on Friday, saying it was failing to keep the semi-autonomous Danish territory and its people safe from incursions by China and Russia.
Denmark has not kept pace in devoting the resources necessary to keep this base, to keep our troops, and in my view, to keep the people of Greenland safe from a lot of very aggressive incursions from Russia, from China, and from other nations.
Vance gave no details of the alleged incursions and said there were no immediate plans to expand U.S. military presence on the ground in Greenland. As Vance's visit was underway, President Donald Trump told reporters at the White House the United States needs Greenland to ensure peace of the entire world.
We need Greenland, very importantly, for international security. We have to have Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can't. If you look at Greenland right now, if you look at the waterways, you have Chinese and Russian ships all over the place. And we're not going to be able to do that. We're not relying on Denmark or anybody else to take care of that situation. And we're not talking about peace for the United States. We're talking about world peace. We're talking about international security.
The vice president's visit on Friday came just after a new broad government coalition was put in place that aims to keep ties with Denmark for now. Greenland's new prime minister said Vance coming to Greenland signaled a lack of respect and called for unity in the face of pressure from outside.
We believe that it is not showing respect for an ally. I think that is a shame. But now we have a government that needs to get to work, and it will start immediately.
A White House official has said Greenland has an ample supply of rare earth minerals that would power the next generation of the U.S. economy. Meanwhile, polls have shown that nearly all Greenlanders oppose being part of the United States. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth visited the Philippines on Friday, where he reaffirmed Washington's ironclad commitment to a defense treaty between the two countries. His first stop on a trip through Asia comes amid growing threats from China. At a press conference with his Philippines counterpart, Hegseth vowed to help the country strengthen a deterrence against what he called China's aggression in the region.
There's a long line of countries in the past who have attempted to test U.S. resolve. We are resolved at this time, at this moment, to work with our partners to reestablish the warrior ethos, to rebuild our military and reestablish deterrence, and come alongside our allies and partners, first and foremost, in this region.
Hegseth's words came as Reuters exclusively obtained satellite images showing two long-range H-6 bombers around the Scarborough Shoal this week, deployed by China. It was Beijing's latest move to assert sovereignty over the hotly disputed area in the South China Sea. China argued there were no issues with freedom of navigation and overflight in the South China Sea, and urged the United States to stop instigating ideological confrontation and sowing discord in the region. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun addressed the controversy at a press briefing on Friday.
All along, it is the U.S. side that has been indulging its allies in provocations in the South China Sea. And it is the U.S. side that has repeatedly fabricated false propositions about China's threat to freedom of navigation and overflight in the South China Sea.
China also advised the Philippines not to act in accordance with the United States and not try to provoke military confrontation. Meanwhile, Hegseth continues to be dogged by questions about his use of the Signal app to share highly sensitive attack plans against Houthi militants in Yemen. When asked about the controversy at the press conference in Manila, Hegseth sidestepped, saying only that he was responsible for ensuring the Defense Department was prepared and ready.
Thank you for the question. I'm responsible for ensuring that our department is prepared and ready to deter and defeat our enemies.
Residents of Sudan's Tati Island have emerged from paramilitary control to speak of hardships suffered and relief that their oppressors have been driven away. Tati Island sits between the capital Khartoum and its twin city Omdurman and was once a soothing hotspot, offering beaches and beautiful landscapes. Sudan's military claimed control of Khartoum and Tati Island this week. Residents say the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, who have been forced by the army off the island, would block people from medical treatment, jail others, and extort inhabitants. Island resident Omar Al-Hassan said an RSF member stopped him from crossing a bridge to see doctors. He claimed our papers were incomplete, but we had all the necessary documents. He just wanted money, he said. Another resident, Abdul Fattah Abdullah, says he was locked up with more than 24 others.
The RSF followed me and came with me all the way here on 4 motorcycles. I was carrying very heavy vegetables. They surrounded me and put me inside. I I spent 20 days, which were the hardest days of my life. A room measuring 4 by 4 with 32 officers, and we were inside this cell. The shooting was coming at us from 2 directions. May God punish them. We endured very, very difficult days.
The RSF did not respond to request for comment by Reuters. The RSF has either denied it violates human rights or said it would hold perpetrators to account, while accusing the army of widespread abuses. The UN accuses both sides in the civil war of abuses that may amount to war crimes. The war has devastated Tati's close-knit farming community, who are at risk of famine and have been ravaged by dengue fever.
World Cup, I think the prize money was announced this week. I think if you win it, it might be the best part of 100 million or maybe a little bit more. Will you and the players be on a nice bonus if you win the competition, maybe?
We don't deserve it this season.
If you win the Club World Cup?
We don't deserve bonus this season.
So that's no.
The bonus is you win, I don't know how much. You go there, it's for the club. The manager, the staff, backroom staff, players, we don't deserve. Not even a watch. No, I would not say they are chaotic. I would say that they have a specific way to play, like it works. They have done so far a really, really good season with the quality of the players they have, the ideas that they have. So, and of course, it will be boring football, and all the teams could play in the same way in all the leagues. So every team playing in their beliefs in the way, a specific way, and they do it really, really well. And the whole team, the positional game will be there. And the other ones will be completely different, more direct, more transitional, more, lose the ball, win the ball, and run. So always other teams more direct, other teams more crosses. So, and you have to read the game tomorrow. We have an experience that the game we play, our first defeat in the Premier League this season, and try to reach the semi-final. I will learn, yeah. In the good moments, always you learn. In the bad moments as well, we learn. Sometimes the experiences you can happen many, many times, and if you don't learn, we have the problems again and again. So, and of course, it's a good lesson for me personally, and I learn a lot, and hopefully for the club as well. When I said in the past, and the people say how naive is Pep and this kind of things, the qualification for the Champions League is a huge success. The people didn't believe me. Now they believe me.
Are you getting agitated about the fact that we haven't heard about the charges yet?
No.
You just carry on your day-to-day business?
We are more than 1 year with that, so nothing changed. Have 1 more week or 2 more weeks or 3 more weeks or 4 more weeks.
In South Sudan's capital Juba, refreshment seller Victoria Kojang is worried. that her country could be about to slide back into violence. A peace deal following a 5-year civil war in the world's youngest nation is being threatened by a growing rift between President Salva Kiir and his longtime rival, First Vice President Riek Machar.
I strongly oppose war. I want to protect myself and my family. I pray day and night. I don't want war.
Machar was placed under house arrest on Wednesday night. His party said that effectively voided the 2018 peace deal that brought Kiir and Machar into a fragile power-sharing government. The peace deal had ended a conflict largely fought along ethnic lines, and in which hundreds of thousands of people died. That's after South Sudan in 2011 won independence from Sudan, currently ravaged by its own civil war. South Sudan is now standing at a crossroads, says chair of the Human Rights Commission in South Sudan, Yasmin Suka.
And its leadership can decide, to honor the revitalized peace agreement and, in fact, to build on the gains of the last 7 years. But they can also, if they choose not to do so, to plunge South Sudan back into another conflict.
The latest crisis was triggered by a recent clash between an ethnic militia, the White Army, and South Sudan's military in a northeastern town. Machar's party denies government accusations that it backs the White Army, which it fought alongside in the civil war. In response to the fighting, Kiir's forces rounded up several of Machar's senior allies. There have since been clashes between forces loyal to the two men outside Juba and elsewhere. On Friday, Kenya said it was sending former Prime Minister Raila Odinga to try and defuse the situation. Britain, meanwhile, advised all its nationals to leave the country. South Sudan's government spokesperson did not respond to requests for comment on Machar's detention or on Odinga's appointment.
A deadly earthquake rocked Southeast Asia on Friday, killing several people, causing a skyscraper under construction to collapse in Bangkok, and toppling buildings in neighbouring Myanmar, which declared a state of emergency in some parts. Witnesses said here several people were killed when a mosque partially collapsed, and local media said others died as a hotel caved in. In Thailand, officials said one of at least a few people were killed under the rubble of the partially built skyscraper. They added that dozens of workers were rescued from the building's remains, but many are reportedly still trapped. Bangkok city authorities declared the capital a disaster-stricken area, saying they needed to assess and monitor damaged areas. Here, hundreds rushed out of buildings onto the streets in panic, and during the tremors, water spilled over the side of a tall hotel building. One Thai office worker saw his building start to sway side to side.
At first, I didn't realise it was an earthquake, but then I saw the table shaking, and the chair and computer started swaying too. I only knew for sure when I heard the noise of the cracking walls and cracking glass. Part of the ceiling even collapsed. That's when I had to run out.
The United States Geological Survey said the quake was of 7.7 magnitude and at a depth of 6.2 miles. It was followed by a powerful aftershock. The epicenter was just over 10 miles from Myanmar's second city of Mandalay, which has a population of about 1.5 million. The country's army-run TV showed collapsed buildings and debris strewn across the city's streets. Myanmar's fire department said it had started a search to check for casualties and damage, but had no further information.
In many Latin American cultures, woman equals mother, as traditional family roles have long dominated in the region.
Mujer con capacidad reproductiva, definitivamente vas a tener que tener hijos en algún momento.
But a growing number of women here, like Isabel Cortez Holguin, are choosing not to give birth, in a radical departure from deeply ingrained expectations of motherhood.
Es importante que exista conciencia que la maternidad es una decisión y que no debería sentirse como una obligación en ningún caso.
The shift is raising fears of an aging population creating a burden for the taxpayer. It's also highlighting how a combination of financial constraints, a lack of state support, and a desire to prioritize careers is pushing women like Cortez into imagining a different future. That's why she and Aran Sosa Diaz founded the online global community Nunca Madres, or Never Mothers, in 2021. The group offers workshops analyzing topics from societal stigma to workplace discrimination to personal finance.
Nunca Madres nació no solamente por la necesidad de nosotras poder hablar de estos temas, sino también porque sabemos que son temas de los que no se habla mucho. Entonces queríamos también como poder amplificar más esta conversación.
Many members say they feel pressured by relatives who believe they'll regret the decision not to have a family and have no one to look after them in old age. Figures show Latin America and the Caribbean has seen the most dramatic decline in birth rates of any region globally since 1950. There is little worldwide data on why women choose not to have children, but Nunca Madres says economic concerns are the top reason women give, including the risk of losing their jobs or stalling their career progression. Climate change comes next, as members question the wisdom of raising children in places where water is being rationed.
Nunca Madres ofrece el acompañamiento, que hoy por hoy es lo que más hemos encontrado que necesitamos, ¿no? Tanto las mujeres que ya decidimos no ser madres, como las mujeres que están en el proceso sobre si sí ser madres o no ser madres.
Global birth rates have shrunk since contraception became widely commercialized in the 1960s. But experts say poor protection against gender violence and a lack of support for prospective mothers have contributed to a steeper decline in Latin America. In Europe, free early childcare policies and paternity leave have somewhat helped boost birth rates. But experts say not many equivalent policies exist in Latin America, where some governments are instead increasing restrictions on abortion, contraception, and sex education. As figures from the World Bank show more women in the region have been joining the workforce, Nunca Madres says it's important for women to have role models that provide alternatives to motherhood.
Cuando tú no tienes esta representación de mujeres, no madres por elección en plenitud, por ejemplo, no te alcanzas a imaginar más allá de lo que tú no ves o no conoces. Siempre es importante la representación para poderte imaginar futuros distintos o elecciones distintas.
Russian President Vladimir Putin suggested Ukraine be placed under a form of temporary administration. Those remarks were carried by Russian news agencies on Friday. Putin says the administration would allow for new elections in Ukraine and for talks with a new government on a peace treaty. That suggestion appeared to address his long-held complaint that Ukraine's authorities are not a legitimate negotiating partner. He says this because President Volodymyr Zelenskiy has stayed in power beyond the May 2024 end of his mandate. There was no immediate comment from Ukraine. However, Zelenskiy has repeatedly rejected this notion, saying Ukraine is legally barred from holding elections while under martial law, adding that holding a poll in wartime conditions would prove impossible. Zelenskiy has also accused Putin in recent days of wanting to press on with the conflict. A White House National Security Council spokesperson said governance in Ukraine was determined by its constitution and the people of the country. Putin's remarks come as the US attempts to forge a settlement with both Moscow and Kyiv by re-establishing links with Russia and holding separate talks with both sides. Putin said he believed US President Donald Trump's efforts to proceed with talks show he truly wants peace. He said Russia was ready to cooperate with many countries, including North Korea, to help end the war. Western and Ukrainian sources say more than 11,000 North Korean troops have been sent to bolster Russian forces, although Moscow has not confirmed this. Putin said Russia was also ready to work with Europe, but that the EU conducts itself in an inconsistent fashion. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 has left hundreds of thousands of dead or injured, displaced millions of people, and reduced towns to rubble. It has triggered the sharpest confrontation for decades between Moscow and the West.
Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on Friday called a national election for May 3rd, launching a 5-week campaign set to be dominated by anxiety over the cost of living.
Our government has chosen to face global challenges the Australian way, helping people under cost of living pressure while building for the future. Because of the strength and resilience that our people have shown, Australia is turning the corner. Now, on the 3rd of May, you choose the way forward.
Albanese's Labour Party won a majority at the last federal election in 2022. However, he has suffered from waning popularity as living costs and interest rates rose steeply under his tenure. Albanese's approval ratings are now close to those of rival Liberal leader Peter Dutton, and recent opinion polls show the ruling party and opposition Liberal National Coalition neck and neck. Albanese recently tried to win back disenchanted voters by announcing measures to please families and businesses. Just earlier this week, his center-left government rushed a bill through the parliament on fresh tax cuts. On Friday, Albanese focused his campaign attack on the opposition coalition. He said they would axe government programs like Medicare, the country's universal healthcare scheme, and revoke new tax cuts. Dutton, meanwhile, says he will match a Labour plan to boost Medicare funding for doctors' visits. He has campaigned on a housing crisis that he says is putting home ownership out of reach. And on Friday, he said cutting permanent migration by 25% will create more homes. Another big campaign issue, which leader would best handle relations with U.S. President Donald Trump? His steel and aluminum tariffs have already hit Australian exports. Without naming Trump, on Friday, Albanese sought to cast Dutton as adopting Trump-like policies, such as cutting public servant jobs.
U.S. immigration authorities have detained and revoked the visa of a Turkish doctoral student at Tufts University who had voiced support for Palestinians in Israel's war in Gaza. Video of Rumeysa Ozturk's arrest showed masked and plainclothes agents taking the 30-year-old into custody on Tuesday evening. About a year ago, she had co-authored an opinion article in her student newspaper, criticizing Tufts University's response to calls by students to divest from companies with ties to Israel and to, quote, acknowledge the Palestinian genocide. On Wednesday, protesters gathered in Somerville, Massachusetts, to speak out against Ozturk's arrest, which has been condemned as an assault on free speech. The administration of U.S. President Donald Trump argues that certain protests are anti-Semitic and can undermine U.S. foreign policy. A spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security said Ozturk had, quote, engaged in activities in support of Hamas. She was taken into custody less than 3 weeks after Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia University student and pro-Palestinian demonstrator, was similarly arrested. Khalil is a U.S. permanent resident.
This cutting-edge health facility is a showcase for Prime Minister Keir Starmer's bid to revitalise Britain's National Health Service and to fend off the right-wing populist Reform UK party, which is led by former Brexit campaigner Nigel Farage and surging in popularity. Hospital corridors have become a battleground, where votes could be won or lost in May 1st local elections in parts of England. In the nuclear medicine department of London's University College Hospital, patients are scanned and treated, particularly for cancer. Targets set by Starmer's Labour Party include doubling the number of scanners to reduce waiting lists for treatment. In its October budget, Labour injected almost $34 billion into the system over 2 years, calling that the largest boost in day-to-day NHS spending since 2010. Jeff Bellingham, medical director for cancer and surgery at the trust that runs the hospital, said they were making inroads into the waiting lists, but challenges remained.
It will depend on the finances that come forward. And the government, I'm sure, would like to give more money than they can. The NHS would like even more money than the government wants to give. But what they've got, we'll be able to use effectively, and we will bring waiting lists down. Whether it's at the speed that everyone is wishing and wanting, I don't know.
Public satisfaction with Britain's rundown and overburdened health service has slumped.
Today I can announce
the NHS was founded by Labour in 1948, and nearly half the party's supporters told pollsters that improving it was their #1 concern. That's where Farage's Reform UK hopes to gain. The acid test for Labour will be whether less affluent regions, where Farage is gaining ground, benefit from its investments in health. Farage's reform has rivalled the popularity of Britain's two main parties in recent weeks. It hopes to win votes in central and northern England, and the nation's increasingly deprived coastal areas, where dissatisfaction with the NHS runs deep. Reform UK did not respond to a request for comment for this story, but it has argued that it could eradicate waiting lists by reducing NHS managers, boosting the workforce, and offering private healthcare vouchers. To cut the number of managers, Starmer has scrapped NHS England, an organisation that runs Britain's health services.
The Sudanese army shelled parts of Khartoum's twin city of Omdurman from early morning on Thursday, residents said. It followed celebrations in Sudan on Wednesday evening, as residents said the Sudanese army had deepened its control of Khartoum. They added that troops drove their rival, the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, from most of the city. It follows 2 years of devastating conflict that's splitting the country into rival zones of control. Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan's ruling council said he flew into Khartoum airport and toured the presidential palace, marking a major military gain. The army said Burhan's flight was the first to land there since the war's outbreak in 2023. It added it had gained control of a major RSF base south of the capital. This was, the army said, the paramilitary group's last major stronghold in Khartoum state. The army released this drone footage, which it said shows RSF fighters retreating across the Nile. Reuters was not able to confirm that the footage showed RSF forces, and the RSF did not immediately comment on Wednesday's military developments. The wider war, though, is far from over, with the RSF still deeply embedded in Western Sudan. Here, they're hardening battle lines and threatening to move the country towards a de facto partition. The war, which erupted 2 years ago as the country was attempting a democratic transition, has caused what the UN calls the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with famine in several areas as well as outbreaks of disease. 12.5 million people have been driven from their homes.
Crammed into their shanty hut, Mohammed Jakir, his wife and 11 children sit in despair. It has been over 2 months since Donald Trump was re-elected as US president, and Jakir's family has felt the effects. They live in the world's largest refugee camp, located in Bangladesh's southeastern seaside, Cox's Bazar. The US has been the largest provider of aid to the Rohingya refugees, contributing nearly $2.4 billion since 2017, according to a State Department website. But Trump announced in February a dramatic cut of over 90% to US aid, which provided global funding for humanitarian relief efforts. With formal work not allowed in the camps for refugees, Jakir says there's little option besides aid to provide for his family.
We have been living here since 2017, for the last 8 years. America recognized us for all these years. But since Joe Biden is gone and Donald Trump stood up, he wants to make us strangers. If that's the case, then where will we go? We want their support back. How will we survive? How will our kids get an education? Please find us a way.
About 70,000 people from Rakhine State have crossed into Bangladesh this year, according to a Bangladesh official, partly due to hunger. Food, healthcare and education in the Rohingya refugee camps have been significantly affected by the recent cuts. This has triggered immediate concerns over food rations, which not only threaten nutritional intake but also endanger access to rice for refugees, according to aid organizations. Masura Khatun, a Rohingya refugee and mother of 6, says her family already don't have enough rice in their diet, and cuts would be harmful. The UN World Food Programme said unless they receive $15 million, they will need to halve the food ration in April. An official from the programme, Muhyiddin Mohi, told Reuters that the revised ration of $6 a month isn't enough and rice supply will go down. When a 2023 round of ration cuts reduced the amount to $8, it led to an increase in hunger and malnutrition, according to the UN. The cut was later reversed. Charity-run hospitals and clinics in the camps have also been forced to lay off staff. Many educational centres have been shuttered too. Gul Bahar's 4-year-old daughter suffers from cerebral palsy. She has been undergoing therapy for the past 3 years, which has helped improve her condition, but now her mother is terrified she will go back to square one. David Bugden is from the Rohingya Refugee Responses Intersector Coordination Group, an organisation that oversees NGO operations in Cox's Bazar. He told Reuters that they have already seen disruptions in health services and a lack of funding for essential nutrition.
We need to do all that we can to increase income-generating activities for the refugees within the camps at least, so that they are not entirely dependent on humanitarian assistance.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres assured the refugees of his continued support during a visit to the camps earlier this month. However, he warned that cuts from the US and other major donors would worsen already dire conditions. Bangladesh's foreign ministry and the US embassy did not respond to a Reuters request for comment.
US President Donald Trump said Wednesday that a 25% tariff for imported cars is coming April 3rd, a trade war escalation he's been threatening for weeks. Auto industry experts say the move will drive up prices and stymie production. Nearly half of all cars sold in the US last year were imported, according to research firm Global Data. Trump, who sees tariffs as a way to raise revenue to offset his promised tax cuts and to revive a long-declining US industrial base, spoke about his plan at the White House.
This will continue to spur growth like you haven't seen. Before I was elected, we were losing all of our plants. They were being built in Mexico and Canada and other places. Now those plants largely have stopped and they're moving them to our country.
Meanwhile, Trump said in a proclamation he'll grant a reprieve of up to a month for imports of auto parts. They'll be subject to tariffs on a later specified date, but no later than May 3rd. Trump's announcement drew swift condemnation from the European Union, and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney called it a direct attack on Canadian workers.
We will defend our workers. We will defend our companies. We will defend our country, and we will defend it together.
The US imported $474 billion worth of automotive products in 2024, including $220 billion in passenger cars. The biggest suppliers were all close US allies: Mexico, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and Germany. In Asia morning trade Thursday, automakers led losses on the Tokyo Stock Price Index. Toyota shares lost more than 3% to become the biggest drag, while Honda and Nissan also fell. Meanwhile, Mazda shares fell 6.4% to become one of the worst performers in the Nikkei. The Center for Automotive Research says the new vehicle levies are likely to drive costs of cars higher for consumers by thousands of dollars. They say it will hit new vehicle sales and result in job losses, since the US automotive industry relies heavily on imported parts. The auto tariffs will follow the day after April 2nd, when Trump is also expected to announce global reciprocal tariffs. Those are aimed at the countries responsible for the bulk of the US trade deficit. However, the US president said on Wednesday the measures may not be the like-for-like levies he has been pledging to impose.
No, we're going to make it all countries, and we're going to make it very lenient. I think people are going to be very surprised. It'll be, in many cases, less than the tariff that they've been charging us for decades.
Since taking office on January 20th, Trump has announced and delayed tariffs on Canada and Mexico for what he alleges is their role in allowing the opioid fentanyl into the US. He also set tariffs on goods from China for the same reason.